1994, Lori Schulman, a student of Westover who was graduating that year, as her ISP project, did some research on the Holocaust. And that year, she began the practice, which we've continued since that time, of lighting a candle in chapel as a remembrance of the European Holocaust as well as Holocausts across the world. We are continuing that practice today, and Sophie and Sarah will lead us with that.
Al Malay Rachamim Shochen Vamiramim Hatze Menucha Nechona Al Kanfa Hashina Bima'alot Kiddushim Udchorim Kizohar Haraki Amazirim En Nishmat Shechala La'oma Be'avur Shenodufa Sidaka Be'ad Chazcharat Nishmata Began Aden Ticha Menuchata Lachen Ba'al Harmahim Yas Tirha Bisater Kinahva La'alamim Veyitzvor Bitzvor Hayamim En Nishmata Adonai Hu Nachalata Ve'tanuach V'shalom El Mishkava V'neyomar Amen.
Now let us recite the prayer in English all together. Merciful God,
who dwells on high and in our hearts, grant perfect peace to the souls of our dearly beloved who have gone to their eternal rest. Shelter them in your divine presence among the holy and pure, whose radiance is like the brightness of the firmament. May their memory inspire us to live justly and kindly. May their souls be at peace, and may they be bound up in the bond of eternal life. Let us say, Amen.
Who and what I am?
You're asking who and what I am,
I am without a past,
without a present.
without a face.
I am a remnant of a person,
Will you accept me among you?
as a refugee. When we
refugees increasingly commands attention by the international community. Refugees are a product of humanity's worst instincts, the willingness of some persons to oppress others, as well as some of its best instincts, the willingness of many to assist and protect the helpless. Refugees also matter to states. They can be weapons or threats. They can be trophies or embarrassments. In personal terms, we care about refugees because of the seed of fear that lurks in all of us that can be stated so simply: it could be me.
Good morning. Over the years, I've had the pleasure of introducing a number of alumni who have been the guest speakers for the annual Amnesty International Chapel Service. Some have been volunteers who have assisted human rights organizations. Others have been professionals who have found careers in the field. Like all of you, those alumni once sat in these chairs as students and listened to other chapel speakers. A number of them heard alumni at Amnesty chapels talking about their work. Perhaps some of them were inspired by what they heard, enough to set them on a course to make human rights an important part of their lives. Looking out at all of you today, I'd like to think that perhaps 5 or 10 years from now, one of you will be back in this space and will be the speaker at that year's Amnesty Chapel, and that you, in turn, will inspire future students to follow the same course. Today, I am especially delighted to introduce our speaker for this year's Amnesty Chapel. Thea Zorn is a member of the West Rivers class of 2008. She is a West. As is her sister Mia, who is a member of the class of 2003. Originally from New Milford, Connecticut, Thea works for the Catholic Charities in Yonkers, New York, where she serves as a resettlement supervisor for the lower Hudson Valley counties of New York State. Thea has actually just begun to serve in this position within the past few weeks. Previously, she had worked for more than 4 years with the International Institute of New England, most recently as its refugee resettlement manager. Some of you who were here last year may remember hearing Thea through a video hookup, speaking about her work with the International Institute during one of our workshop presentations, offered as part of last year's theme, Who is My Neighbor? Thea graduated from the University of Connecticut with honors magna cum laude and holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in political science with a minor in human rights. In addition to serving as today's chapel speaker, Thea will be available to meet with students and faculty to talk more about her experiences working with refugees during the rest of the morning and at lunch in the dining room. So please join me now in welcoming today's chapel speaker, Thea Zorn.
Once stated, refugees live in a divided world between countries in which they cannot live and countries which they may not enter. Even though as a nation we are being confronted with the refugee crisis, the United States has had a long history of being a safe haven for the oppressed. My own family arrived in the United States as war refugees from Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1994. My family had endured living in war conditions for well over 2 years, had caught one of the very last buses leaving my hometown of Banja Luka, and then we were kept in a UN-sanctioned camp for almost 3 weeks on the border between Bosnia and Croatia. Before we were finally given passage into Croatia to escape the atrocities that were happening around us. We had 4 suitcases, and we arrived in New Milford, Connecticut, where we were reunited with my aunt's family. At the time, I was young, too young to process the severity of our situation, but growing up and realizing that you can become a target overnight for simply being born with the wrong name is overwhelmingly shattering. Because in my culture, you can generally identify a person's religious background simply by their name. Now pair that self-realization with challenges of acclimating to a new way of life, a new language, with a limited community, whether they were Bosnian or Americans. These were obstacles that were very real and present in my household. So, it's important to understand who and what a refugee is. It's an individual who is outside of his or her country of nationality or residence, who is unable or unwilling to return due to a well-founded fear of persecution, based on his or her race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or simply a membership in a particular social group. There are nearly 21.3 million refugees worldwide, the highest it has ever been. To be designated refugee status, an individual has to apply through the UNHCR, or better known as the UN Refugee Agency. The UNHCR flags the most vulnerable cases for possible resettlement in various countries in the world, including the United States. But the fact remains, less than 1% of the world's refugees are ever actually resettled. After the UNHCR screens and interviews an applicant and designates her as a refugee, the United States has its own vetting process on whether or not to allow the refugee to resettle domestically. This process can take anywhere from 18 to 24 months, if not longer. Most of my clients who came from Africa had waited on average 10 to 15 years for resettlement. Most of their children were born and raised in camps with limited medical care and no formal system of education. Should a refugee be approved for our domestic resettlement, the Department of State will designate which of 9 voluntary agencies in the United States will take the case and actually help the refugees move here. No matter which agency accepts the allocation, the refugees that arrive in the United States go through the Federal Reception and Placement Program, which is a 90-day program that provides assistance to refugees as they navigate their new home and surroundings. Services can include, but are not limited to, housing, employment, English classes, school enrollment for minors, setting up health screenings, applying for benefits, and community orientation lessons. The real work of a local resettlement agency begins once they receive the refugee's travel application. Often the agency will only have 2 weeks at most to assign a caseworker, find and secure housing, do an apartment setup, confirm airport reception, and schedule initial appointments. Each refugee, whether it's an individual or a family, comes in with their own complexities and barriers. Independence and self-sufficiency is the primary purpose of the Reception and Placement Program. And as social service providers, we want to empower and support the refugees that come through our doors. Successful resettlement is only feasible when it's done in partnership with the community. I pursued this field because I was frustrated with the challenges my family and my parents had faced, and I wanted to improve even one family's experience. Since graduating college, I've had the pleasure of working for 2 different organizations with very different resettlement models. During my time with International Institute of New England, I, along with my team, resettled 240 individuals in 1 fiscal year. Even though that may seem like a large number of people, I can still recall each of their stories and the journeys that they had to take to get to safety. I can also recall my firsts. The first apartment I set up. I actually stayed until midnight, cleaning, making beds, frantically trying to make the apartment feel like a home. Or my first airport pickup, and the flight got delayed until 1 in the morning, and when the 2 Syrian families of 8 finally arrived, they had 14 bags amongst themselves. And let me tell you, 4 cars were not enough. But in all seriousness, the reality was that the 2 families had fled Aleppo and were in Turkey for over 4 years, barely making ends meet, waiting to see if they would be chosen for reallocation. Their entire lives were in those suitcases. Or my first medical case, where the African family of 5 had 2 children with intense medical needs, and they arrived in the early hours of the morning via ambulance, after traveling for 2 days straight. The youngest and most ill had been malnourished for so long and lacked the medical care he desperately needed that his development was permanently affected. Or the first time I had a client intake, which is generally a meeting where we establish a service plan by setting short-term goals and long-term goals with the individual or family member. My Chinese client and gone over 7 years without seeing her son or husband. The entire time we met, she had a smile on her face because they were finally reunited. Each case began with just biographic information on a piece of paper and then the decision whether our resettlement agency could provide them with adequate services. And then they arrive, and these individuals and family members, they become our neighbors. They have an impact on you and your perspective. Currently, in my position with Catholic Charities, I have the unique opportunity to establish partnerships with ad hoc coalitions and interfaith groups who co-sponsor our incoming refugees. These are people who have been compelled to step up and unify with other members in their community to welcome arriving refugees and provide them with much-needed services as they embark on their new lives in the U.S. Solidarity is critical, especially given the political climate. Now, more than ever, advocacy is pivotal to the resettlement of refugees. Advocacy will generate awareness around refugee issues, but also serve as a driving force for comprehensive policies. At a time when there have already been 2 executive orders that have targeted specific refugee populations and put an already vulnerable set of people at even further risk, at a time when the predetermined refugee admission number of 110,000 has been halved, and at a time when resettlement agencies are bracing for the loss of funding, this is the time to act. My own grassroots lobbying began here at Westover. Coming to Westover, I honed into my passion by taking the classes and courses that resonated with me. There was one in particular that jump-started my own advocacy efforts, and it was Jill Freeland's Resistance and Rescue, the fight against genocide. The course was meant to study the people who had the courage to resist oppression and risk their own lives for others. The final project required that we choose a cause we felt connected to, explore the ways people were trying to bring about change, and then take one action of our own to help. I remember reaching out to the International Rescue Committee in New York to participate in a program that was geared towards refugee women and children. Since that class at Westover, I have made it a personal goal to not be a bystander, but rather an activist, to let my voice be heard, especially for those who cannot speak for themselves. So, I encourage each and every one of you to collaborate and start your own advocacy groups. Tell your stories. Write to your senators and representatives during lunch. Have phone banks after sit-down dinners to call your local representatives. Volunteer at a local NGO, nonprofit organization, or simply sign up with a community service team. These are not only tangible efforts, but they can actually make a difference. You can change the course of another person's